Hey guys, it's Toniko, and today I want to talk about how I turn my storyboards into fleshed out animatics, or watchable storyboard reels. Now you may have seen me experiment with animatics that are fleshed out, that have a bit more animation or lighting, and I do want to talk about my process on how I get to that. Now, I've already talked about the whole storyboard discussion of seeing storyboards that are fully animated and fully posed out. That oftentimes repeats a conversation of what's a storyboard, what's an animatic. There's a whole controversial debate about it on Twitter, online, every time someone posts a super fleshed out animatic, especially from an action show. I already made a video talking about my overall opinion about this, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. I'm really just going to talk about my overall process of how I turn my really rough storyboards into these fleshed out animatics. First off, let's talk about thumbnailing. I personally think that thumbnailing is the heart of storyboarding, because at this point you're just presenting ideas, and this could mean very crude, loose, limited drawings, but it gets the idea across. Now, some of you guys may see storyboards feeling like overly posed out animatics at times, but all of that is really just icing of the cake. I actually spend a lot of time thinking about my shot choices, my staging, and the storytelling aspect. Now, I've talked about the thumbnail stage a few times in my channel, especially in my Sonic the Hedgehog 2 work. But if you guys want me to make an exclusive video on how I approach thumbnails in the very first part of storyboarding, and in my opinion, the most crucial part of storyboarding, let me know. So I would prepare a very loose thumbnail version of my storyboards, where I showcase the blocking, the staging. Due to my experience of working in action shows, I've been making it a habit to include the horizon line, because that's where I can indicate my vanishing point, my perspective, my camera angles, grids if I need to do that, still keeping the drawings very simple. For my professional work nowadays, I use Storyboard Pro. It's the industry standard for a lot of storyboard work. What's great about this program is not only can I just storyboard, but I can also edit my storyboards into video with camera moves. And that's what I do. I'll just do a rough thumbnail version and add some timing, some camera moves, just to make a watchable version of my storyboards with these very loose thumbnail drawings, just to get an idea across. In almost every case, I try to avoid animating the poses. I usually just use arrows to indicate an idea for the movement that I have in mind, and as long as the intentions are clear. Whether I'm working in a studio or I'm working with a client, or I'm just doing these things by myself, this is where I can catch if something is too long or too short, what needs to be added, what needs to be removed, before I actually start making the drawings look nice. And if I'm working with a client, it allows them to see a watchable version of this project. But yeah, one of the main reasons why I use Storyboard Pro is I can board and edit on the fly, or thumbnail and edit on the fly. So as you can see here, this is a rough drawing. It's a single drawing, but there's camera moves and it's all timed out with the key frame and the key poses here for the cameras. So this is great for me to kind of make a watchable version of my work, before I show it off to clients, or just so that when I start polishing these boards, at least the timing is already there. And what's great is that I can also work off canvas. So if I were to show you guys this whole shot without the camera moves, it's just this guy getting his head blown off. But as you can see, there's a little square or a little viewfinder that shows what the camera moves might be. And if I just flip that camera view on, now you can see what that looks like. So again, what's cool about this is that I can just work in a single master shot where there's no camera moves, or it's just like a stationary, drawing or set, and the camera moves are just moving on a separate entity. Now, once I have the thumbnails down with a bit of timing and editing and some basic camera moves, I would do another pass of the roughs where I try to figure out the poses, making them feel more conformed. So I'm thinking about things like hip orientation, the tilts of the hips, the tilts of the shoulders, and just making sure the poses feel a bit more alive and a bit more grounded and have a sense of weight. This is where I also try to figure out perspective issues if I come across any. Sometimes I'll just do a single drawing, like a single layout drawing, to indicate the proportions of my character in different parts of the scene, and just use that as a scale reference. As far as drawings go, you can tell that I'm still being very rough, but I'm already trying to indicate the orientation and the angles of where the body is facing, breaking down certain shapes into solid primitives like cubes, spheres, etc., tubes, just so that I have a reference for solid drawing. But from here, I'm also now adding a bit more posing. Depending on the scene, this could be really complex, but I try to be as simple as possible with limited drawings, but with stronger poses. But again, it depends on the scene itself. If it's a very subtle scene, you can get away with less drawings. If it's an action scene that has a lot more specific beats, you might want to show more information with more drawings. But even at this stage, I'm trying to avoid things like in-betweening or over-posing or elaborating more on the movement, because if I want to and I have time for that, I can do that later on, and I'll show you how I do that later in this video. Then I'll start to clean up my drawings for a bit. Now, I like to keep my drawings still relatively rough and loose, but I'll do another pass on top of it so it's a bit clearer and easier to read. This is where I use less of the scratchy lines or the super sketchy lines and try to be more decisive with my strokes, meaning 1 or 2 strokes for every line that you see. Sometimes I'll just try to capture the silhouette of my rough drawing more so than trying to draw each line literally. And then once I have a rough silhouette, I'll start adding in lines within that silhouette to close in on some of the details. Now, I'll do this for every rough pose that I have in another layer. And then once I have those key poses down, this is where I can make the decision to make more breakdowns and in-betweens by hand. In most cases, I'm just going to manipulate the drawings that I already have using the lasso tool and just change things frame by frame to have a bit of movement. Maybe changing the rotation of a line or a part of the body, just do some digital skewing and stretching so that when I play it as an animatic, I'm showing movement without having to redraw every single new frame. 1, it saves a lot of time and effort, and 2, from my opinion, sometimes too many new lines or too many redraws makes things feel a bit more distracting and a bit busy. Like, if there's a subtle change where the character's head only turns in a very slight angle and I decide to redraw that, it's gonna come off as really busy and distracting. Whereas I could just use the lasso tool, manipulate some parts of that face to give it the illusion of depth while it turns, without always having to make new drawings. A shot like this, there's only like 3 key poses, and in between those key poses, I'm really just manipulating things with the lasso tool, selecting bits of the nose or the face or the hair, and just moving it around just to add an illusion of movement. Oh, by the way, when it comes to cleaning up drawings, this is a stage where I start to finesse or clear the background a bit. So instead of just perspective lines and horizon, I'm describing the set just a bit more. Whether you want to leave the grid lines in the background, that's all up to you. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. It's really up to you. Now, if I wanted to give my boards a bit of that finish, a bit of more atmosphere, then I think about things like tone, values, shadows, lighting, etc. So first of all, I'll make a solid matte for each of my drawings, and that just means having a solid fill underneath the drawing layer. And this is so that the character isn't always see-through. Now, it always depends what look I'm going for or what the context of the storyboard is. I like to think about darks against lights and lights against darks. Or maybe the background is a bit more faded and has less contrast, so it doesn't take the focus away from the characters. And again, it depends on the scene too. So I like to think about lighting a lot. Like even putting a bit of highlight and some little lighting on the character gives a sense of focus in the framing. Like a sharp light on a character where everything is dark gives attention to that character. If the scene has a lot of like lighting and atmosphere and I want it to be moody, then I'll start utilizing soft shading. So things like soft lighting or soft shadows just to have a much softer look for some shots. Maybe I could talk about how I think about lighting my scenes. That'll probably be another topic of its own. But to me, adding things like lighting and tone on my finished storyboards just makes the boards feel a lot more done. Now, I do want to talk quickly about camera moves, and I actually talked about it early on. So again, I tend to board in a way where it's just like one big shot per panel, where I tend to pose at my characters and the camera either follows them or does whatever it needs to. A program like Storyboard Pro allows me to work off canvas and allows me to move the camera around outside of the canvas as well. And again, one of the main reasons why I board like this is because I export these shots or these images into layouts when I need to put it into an animation file and animate on top of it. However, some scenes need a bit more elaboration and specificness to some camera moves, so especially when it comes to like 3D camera moves where a camera is actually flying through the scene and it's actually going through foreground elements and things like that, I sometimes just try to do that by hand. And when I board in Photoshop, so when I worked on Blue Eye Samurai and past feature productions, I actually did all the camera moves by hand. Like I would duplicate the storyboard panels, shift it around by a few inches or centimeters, whatever, and then just like make a new panel out of that. And it is the most tedious process I've ever had to deal with, especially working with Photoshop. So yeah, when it comes to camera moves, I try to keep it simple. Like if I'm just working on a 2D storyboard, I'll draw it out as like one big master shot for the shot and make the camera do its thing within that parameter. So when I decide I want to punch the camera in closer to the character or further away from the character, I can do that easily on a separate camera layer. Like over here, you'll see that I'm faking a parallax effect. Like there is a camera move with the camera layer, but as you can also see, I'm moving the foreground elements and the far background element to give it that fake parallax look. So if I were to show the camera view, it actually looks like it's, you know, a 3D movement, just like small camera tricks like that. But yeah, I tend to work off canvas where like things are just like one single shot for each scene or each shot, yeah. And the camera move just does its own thing. So this is one big shot, but camera move again or camera view, you know. For this really dramatic shot with a car chase, it's actually just so yeah, I actually did have to sort of like animate things by hand or overpose them. The background is just like a 3 drawing loop of trees passing by. This alone is the sort of master shot or the panel, but if I add the camera move option on, now you can see it feels a lot more visceral because the camera is like rotating, it's shaking, but a lot of the legwork of the movement is already there. Now let's talk about timing and editing. Now I do briefly talk about it in my thumbnail pass where I put my thumbnails in timed order with timing and some camera moves, and that already acts as the foundation of my edit, except with more panels and poses, and from there that's when I start stretching and skewing the panels of the timeline. Some panels only last for a few frames, whereas others will last several seconds. Something that I noticed that happens that usually happens to other people is that they'll over panel or over pose things, not knowing that it's overly posed out, and then when they start to edit it, they realize some of those drawings can only last for a single frame, or they have to take some drawings out to fit into the animatic. And I think that's one of the many reasons why you see overly posed or overly animated storyboards. Sometimes storyboard artists don't really know how many poses they're putting in until they have to time it out. But yeah, like what I showed here throughout this video, I boarded mostly in Storyboard Pro. And if I boarded my storyboards in Storyboard Pro, that's a tongue twister right there, I'll just do the editing in Storyboard Pro and save it as a movie file. And if I want to edit it some more, I'll bring it into Premiere or some other video editing program. If I boarded in Photoshop, I would actually export some of those panels into image sequences, bring it into a video editing program, and put it all together there. Or another thing that I would sometimes do is I would screen record myself actually flipping through my independent panels one panel at a time, and however I chose to sort of flip through my panels, how I timed it is actually recorded into a video. But yeah, since I primarily use Storyboard Pro nowadays for storyboarding, I basically do most of my rough edit there. Now, as for things like adding music and sound, it really depends on what my pipeline is, how I'm working, and the context of the storyboard. So sequences where I know music plays a pivotal role, I'll add the music track in my storyboard file and board to the music. Now, what about voice lines? Well, I try to add the voice lines within the storyboard files because I like to board hearing the voice acting, hearing the line delivery, and that'll dictate what my drawings might look like. But when the storyboards aren't really specific for the music, I'll actually add the music later on in another video editing program. So I'll render out my animatic as a movie file, put it in a video editing software, whether it's Adobe Premiere or something else. That's where I start adding music and sound. So yeah, that's just a basic rundown of how I turn my storyboards into animatics. And this is the way that I usually work on my personal projects as well as professional work. I start with rough thumbnails with pretty much no movement or animation, put it in, let's say, Storyboard Pro, figure out the camera and the timing if I need to do that, and then start fleshing out the drawings from there, making the drawings feel more resolved, eventually cleaning up the lines so it's just a bit more clear, and then adding tone to add more atmosphere or lighting, etc. Now, the reason why I wanted to make this video is sort of to demystify some of the process of turning a storyboard into an animatic, especially the super polished storyboards that you see that are really posed out and animated really well. A lot of beginning story artists see that and say, oh, I'm going to try and make my storyboards as pretty as that, and they don't really think too hard about the foundation of the storyboards. And that's why I wanted to show you guys my thumbnails and my initial planning, because that is the true heart of storyboarding. Now, if you want to enter the industry as a story artist or a storyboard artist, or you want to just do storyboards, remember that it starts with the initial idea, the initial thumbnails, the loose drawings, the things that are not super pretty, because that stuff can be fleshed out later down the line when you want to make it pretty for, let's say, an animatic, a really polished storyboard, whatever you want to make out of it. Anyways, that's all. Bye. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.